Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
I think, do you know what? If I've achieved anything at all in my so-called career, I would derive enormous pride from the fact that nobody who's listened to this programme for the last 2 years should be surprised by the absolute chaos which is now engulfing the end game of Brexit. Maybe not 2 years, but certainly 18 months. From the minute Article 50 was triggered, everything that is happening now was, as you know and understand, absolutely inevitable. The only people arguing otherwise were the people trying to sell the notion that an as yet unspecified but supremely magical and magnificent plan was just around the corner, and their inability to describe that plan was not evidence at all that the plan never existed. And today we move into the sort of closing scenes of that process, because unless there is a plan, unless Michael Gove, Boris Johnson, David Davis and Liam Fox at Chequers this weekend can say to the Prime Minister, no, we don't like your plan, which, I mean, lordy, the EU have probably already rejected. We don't like your plan, here's our plan. Because do you know what no deal is? And always has been. No deal is actually no plan. That's what no deal is. That's why people started suggesting that no deal was actually a good idea, in direct contradiction of everything they said during the referendum, because they'd come to realise that there was no plan. There are no unicorns. There is no magical solution just over the horizon that clever men are going to arrive with imminently and deliver into the hands of David Davis, Boris Johnson, Liam Fox and Michael Gove. No deal means no plan. Brexit means Brexit is an utterly fatuous and hollow slogan. No deal means no plan is a perfect nugget of logic, actually. And that's I think that's what we're moving towards now. Don't you? Is the admission, the closest they'll ever get to admitting that they never had a plan would be to claim that they want no deal. I don't think Parliament will let no deal go through, because no deal is a disaster unless you are, I don't know what word to use. I've tried to be polite and kind, but we must be moving to a place now where people who think no deal is a good idea can be fairly described as, well, let's just say profoundly wrong, profoundly and demonstrably wrong. So this is where we are. She's trying to put together a plan. You know, when you did life-saving classes at school, did you do them? Back when swimming lessons were quite commonplace in British schools, and you'd graduate up. You had to do a length in your pyjamas. Do you remember that? You had to swim a length in your pyjamas, and you had to dive for the brick for your green badge. Did you do that? You dive for the brick to get your green badge, and then as you get a bit better, was it your yellow badge where you had to rescue a classmate from drowning? And the teacher would say that quite often when you're trying to rescue a classmate from drowning, the classmate might react very badly when you get to them. They might be panicking, and they might actually hit you or lash out at you, and they might actually be responsible for you both being further imperiled by the rescue attempt on the friend who's drowning. Theresa May, for whom I hold no torch whatsoever, Theresa May is now doing that. She's now trying to rescue David Davis, Liam Fox, Boris Johnson and Britain from drowning. But of course, David Davis, Liam Fox, Boris Johnson and Michael Gove are lashing out furiously as she attempts to drag them to the shore. They don't have a plan. The alternative is to drown, but they have to lash out furiously, because the alternative would be to admit that now is the time for them to stop struggling, shut up and be dragged back to shore. What doesn't fill one with confidence or positivity is the fact that Theresa May is in the role of lifesaver. You have now a cabinet split fairly clearly along one line. On one side, you have weak and cowardly people who are desperately trying to minimise the damage the country is doing to itself without explicitly and publicly admitting that that's what they have to do, because they're so frightened of upsetting the newspapers that encourage so many voters to punch themselves in the face. So they can't do that. I mean, you see the editor of The Sun was visiting Downing Street last night. You think I make this stuff up? There's photos. The editor of The Sun was visiting Downing Street last night. It's unbelievable. So she knows, and Philip Hammond knows, and a few of the other vaguely decent people in the cabinet know that what they are doing is damage limitation. But they can't say so publicly, because that would be to call the editor of The Sun and the editor of the Daily Mail and the editor of the Daily Telegraph, and more pertinently the owners of the Daily Telegraph and the owners of The Sun, that would be to call them treacherous liars who've led the country to the precipice of utterly unmitigated and unnecessary disaster. So she can't do that. She's too scared of them. So her job is to minimise the damage that the country is doing to itself without publicly admitting that the country is doing damage to itself, because the people that encourage the country to do damage to itself are still running the newspapers that she runs scared of every day. If you think I'm exaggerating, have a look at who her official spokesperson is. Former political editor of the Daily Mail. I wonder who he's got first on speed dial. The Prime Minister, his current boss, or the editor of his old paper, his ex-boss? Be quite interested to know, wouldn't you? Maybe they're equal. And on the other side of the cabinet divide, you've got the people who are now, there's 7 of them, I believe, met in Boris Johnson's office last night, the people who are now looking at the mess that they have done more than anybody else in Britain to create, the inevitable mess, from the minute Article 50 was triggered without there being any plan whatsoever. The 7 people sitting in Boris Johnson's office yesterday are looking at the chaos they have created, and all they are wondering about is how they can use it to advance their own careers. So you have weak, cowardly, craven damage limitation on one side of the cabinet, and you have pathetic, utterly unprincipled, country-damaging self-interest on the other side. I don't know how this shakes down, do you? 0345 6060 973 is the number that you need. Because what you have to do now, if you subscribe to the no deal is better than a bad deal school of thought, because you hate thinking, and that is a phrase that they gave you quite early on, and it still fits, you know, you can still excuse yourself from thinking about things by saying that slogan. Brexit means Brexit's probably had the sheen knocked off it now. You feel a bit silly saying Brexit means Brexit when you don't know what Brexit means, do you now? I don't know. But in terms of the no deal is better than a bad deal, absolute patent nonsense. But it still just about works, because if you don't think, you don't have to arrive at the conclusion that no deal means no plan. No plan at all. The other great catchphrase that people used to cover up their deliberate ignorance, willful ignorance, was that they need us more than we need them. The thing about that phrase is that it's now been proven to be untrue, which means that theoretically a functioning intellect would now redraw the lines of engagement. When the facts change, as John Maynard Keynes famously observed, I change my mind, sir. What do you do? So if we pretend it was ever a fact that they need us more than we need them, if we pretend that that was ever true, and I don't actually hold particular negative feelings towards people who did believe it. I think I kind of believed it as well. I'm British. I think that Britannia rules the waves. I presumed on some level that we were more powerful than we've actually proved to be. So I don't think there's any crime in having swallowed that line. They need us more than we need them. But now it's categorically been proven not to be true. You really should be reviewing whatever destination that led you to. So if you've arrived at your view of leaving the European Union because you thought that they need us more than we need them, and you've now had it demonstrated to you absolutely incontrovertibly that that's not true, you should change your view. But you can't. And I understand that. It's very, very, very difficult to admit that you're wrong, or that you've made a mistake, or even more pertinently, that you've been conned by people that you trusted. But, again, if you've been listening to this programme for 18 months, you've got no excuse for being surprised by what's happening this weekend. Plan versus no plan, where all plans are worse than what we've currently got. And that is where we are now. I don't know what happens next. I haven't seen a sort of psychosis on a national scale like this in my lifetime. I was too young to be that politically engaged with the poll tax riots, or the poll tax protests, but that wasn't a psychosis. That I understood the political principle that was being debated. We are now looking at a split in the cabinet between people who are they're in a house and they have the choice between either moving into an inferior property but desperately trying hard to make it as less inferior as possible, or, that's where Theresa May is trying to lead the cabinet, or burning it down without any knowledge whatsoever of where you're going to be living tomorrow, which is what Boris Johnson is trying to do. But he doesn't care, because if he owns the charred remains of the ex-home, he's happy. He would rather be Prime Minister of a diluted, diminished, broken nation, possibly split across the the mainland of Ireland, or indeed across the mainland of the United Kingdom with the Scottish nationalists watching events very closely, he would rather be Prime Minister of a diminished and divided nation than just step away from the fray and let the proper grown-ups get on with the business of trying to minimise the damage that people like Boris Johnson have done to the population at large and the nation in particular. 0345 60973. There is a third option, of course. The third option is to stick your fingers in your ears again, close your eyes, and just start singing about fish or unicorns. There is now no fourth way. There is either the plan that is designed to minimise the self-inflicted damage, the no plan, which is to leap utterly ill-equipped and parachuteless into the unknown, and then option 3, which is to shut your eyes, stick your fingers in your ears, and just whistle Dixie. That's where we are. Everybody, really, with even the vaguest understanding of the issues, should have arrived at this conclusion. But because feelings have played such an important role in the entire process, it's still very difficult for some people to get over the line. And possibly, I'm wrong. I'd probably most like to speak today to people who think that I am. It's no plan, or inferior plan, or close your eyes, stick your fingers in your ears, and just sing about fish. Give me a call if you think there's a fourth way. 0345 6060973 is the number that you need. And if you are feeling particularly honest and morally strong, and you did used to subscribe to the idea that they need us more than we need them, or you were persuaded, however temporarily, that Brexit means Brexit meant anything, or you kind of thought that no deal would be better than a bad deal, and now you realise just how comprehensively you were conned, I'd love to know what the needle-moving moment was. I'd love to know what it was or who it was. I presume some people have woken up in the night sweating and thinking, what the hell have I done? I've let Boris Johnson and Michael Gove define my children's future. What on earth was I thinking? All right, David Cameron is a plate-faced buffoon and Theresa May is the worst Prime Minister this country has ever seen. I make no apology for not necessarily thinking they were geniuses. But I've let Michael Gove and Boris Johnson lead my family's future into absolute, unspecified, undefined oblivion. What on earth was I thinking? Or you stick your fingers in your ears, you close your eyes, and you sing about fish. You're quite right. There was a fig leaf that I missed, but the fig leaf that I missed is the one that comes after the chaos, not the one that you employ now to pretend that the chaos isn't imminent. That's when you say, oh, it was all the fault of people who said it was going to be awful, that it was awful. It wasn't the fault of people who said it was going to be brilliant. It was all the fault. We should have got behind it. Should have believed more. So I've given you 3 options. Number 1, Theresa May, trying desperately to put together a plan that will not be as good as what we currently have, but will be enough to persuade the European Union to let us stay as close to their previously our market as possible. Number 2, no plan at all. Just literally close your eyes and run in whatever direction. That's the Boris Johnson position. Don't think for a minute that there is anything more substantive in Boris Johnson's brain than closing his eyes and running in a random direction, as long as it might lead him possibly to the door of 10 Downing Street. And number 3, which I think is what a significant proportion of the 17-odd million people who voted to leave will have to do now, is close your eyes, put your fingers in your ears, and just make like Shaggy. It wasn't me. Or option 4, which you're welcome to share with me now. Richard's in Tooting. Richard, what would you like to say?
So look, I don't disagree with anything you're saying. This thing is an absolute car crash. I think it ends in disaster. I think Theresa May's going to carry the can for that. Boris Johnson, for his part, is an absolute disgrace. He has led the working man down the path. The working man is going to carry the can, and his career is going to go on. So he is an absolute disgrace. I think the fourth way for me is reformation of the EU. It's not just the UK that has a problem with this. Look at AfD, look at the rise there in Germany, look at the problems that Merkel is having, look at the Italians that just voted in a government that is anti-EU and it wants to move away from it.
No, it doesn't. It doesn't actually. It's anti-EU rules on freedom of movement and, well, particularly on migration from outside the European Union into Italy. But there's no prospect of them either voting to leave the euro or to leave the European Union. It's just it's the very Brexit British press that typify these continental European issues in the way that they want them to be. The same in Germany. Merkel's problems, of which she's had many, are front page or massive news. Her solutions and successes are afterthoughts. So they don't. The things you point to, the EU does need reforming, but the rise of fascists is not the reason why the EU needs reforming, mate.
James, I would disagree. It's just about immigration. If you look at the budgetary plans that the Italians have, they are expansionary, they are anti-austerity, they do not fit with the EU and its projection of how governments should move forward and spend. There is going to be a clash.
No, but that was the five-star side of it rather than the Liga side of it, and their promise to actually just give a cheque to every voter in Italy hardly gets mentioned here. You want to find out why people voted for five-star? They were promised a few thousand euros each. You can talk all you want about expansionary economic policies and migratory problems, but if I stood out now and promised to give you $5,000 if you voted for me, chances are you'd vote for me. But anyway, crack on with the fourth way. The EU needs to reform. Where do we fit into that? Because we're not going to be able to help influence or affect that reform if we're outside it, are we?
Yeah, no, absolutely, I agree. And if you look at the speech that Theresa May made ahead of Brexit, she talked about staying in the EU as being able to influence the room from that position.
The other problem, I mean, I take the point of what you've said, and I'm sorry if I've been a little bit curt, but when you talk about immigration, no European Union countries have got a majority problem with freedom of movement between European Union countries.
Sorry, say that again?
No European Union countries have a majority supporting the rejection of freedom of movement of EU citizens between EU countries. They're worried about people coming from outside the European Union. In the case of racists and xenophobes in this country, they're told lies about how easy it would be, for example, for a Syrian asylum seeker to get German citizenship and then move to Britain. But no German or Italian or French or Spanish majority position rejects freedom of movement within the 28 countries, soon to be the 27. That's a very important conflation to clear up.
It is, but as the prospect of the club and the expansion of that club grows eastwards, and the prospect of Turkey, which I understand is now a diminished probability.
Diminished probability, mate. It's absolutely off the table forever, although you know who the most prominent British politician to support Turkish membership of the European Union was.
I do recall, I think he's got blonde hair.
That's the fella, Boris Johnson. But we must all carry on trusting him.
No, absolutely. So look, I take that point, but what I do say is the populism, the needle is shifting within Europe, and the UK is not alone in its perception.
The UK's support for leaving the European Union was not fascistic. The rise of and I appreciate some of the prominent supporters of leaving the European Union have shown their fascist colours now by going off to cosy up to the Front National or give speeches at the behest of was it Himmler or Goebbels' granddaughter to the AfD, granddaughter of a prominent Nazi. I appreciate that those masks have slipped. Some of us, of course, knew that they would and predicted repeatedly that those masks would slip. But the rise of fascism in other European countries is not a reason why the EU needs to reform. That's just classic racism and authoritarianism. It's got nothing to do with economics or indeed the truth. But as we've said a million times on this programme, you make someone feel angry and frightened, you have got an ally much, much stronger than someone who feels informed and calm. Peter's in Gillingham. Peter, what's going on?
Good morning,
Hello,
James.
Peter.
I'm in favour of satire because politics is now satire. So I'm favouring option 2,
Which is
to crash out and just have food shortages, petrol shortages, and everything else. Why am I saying that? I'm a bit of a fan of 50s sci-fi movies. Dave Earth Stood Still, not the one that was remade.
George Romero. Are we doing the George Romero Brexit now? Is that
exactly? I want half an hour in a lift where everything is shut off. In fact, I'd like 2 weeks where food shortages, petrol shortages. Goodness sake, when the chicken was off earlier this year, there was mass panic.
Look what's happened with the carbon dioxide, mate, this week.
Well, I was watching that in a pub in Sheppey, and people left the England game because the beer was off. So it doesn't take much to drop down.
And we're looking at the silly stuff like chicken and beer. Of course, the bottom line, as we discovered yesterday with caller after caller after caller, is that the production lines will just stop. The conveyor belts will cease moving, and manufacturing already castrated or emasculated in this country will end up being completely killed off.
From conversations in Brexit Central, people have no idea how quickly this country will descend into a...
But do you know who told them? This is the weirdest thing for me, Peter. As I mentioned to the last fellow, Boris Johnson was the one who flew the flag for Turkey joining the EU more than anybody else. He'd even made a film about it for the BBC. But this sort of quotes, economist, end quotes, Patrick Minford, who is the only one that people like Jacob Rees-Mogg and that lot refer to, he has said that our manufacturing would be destroyed. Our manufacturing and our farming would no longer exist. But the idea that we'd be able to do deals with countries that resent our protections and regulations would make up for it. So even these people talking gibberish about tariff-free access or about trade deals with other countries, that the only quotes, economist, end quotes, on their page has predicted that manufacturing and agriculture would be completely decimated. They just never mention that, do they?
These are facts, and of course, feelings are what drives people's sort of...
But when does it... I mean, you can feeling right up until you're on, until the noose is around your neck or the guillotine is falling. At what point do people actually, and I hope some of them have got the guts to call me today, at what point do people actually say, all right, yeah, my feelings, they have now been overtaken by the facts?
Well, the British way is to complain after it's happened. I would like 2 or 3 weeks of chaos. I don't really want that, but I think it may be the only thing...
But it'll be too late by then. I don't think we can press rewind, mate, can we? Once we've gone...
Well, I think that Theresa May could strike a clever deal with the EU to say, we're going to have martial law, you'll have to drop food aid, and then 3 weeks later we'll come back on our knees, begging and kicking, and saying, please, can we rejoin? And they will probably feel compelled. The only point at which I agree with David Davis is they don't particularly want us to leave because it will encourage the others. So I think if
You're joking, aren't you? Well, encourage to leave on very, very favourable or positive terms will encourage the others, but enthusiasm for leaving the European Union in every other European Union country has plummeted since we actually voted to do it. They've had a little look over the cliff edge, but we've still got Boris Johnson, Michael Gove, David Davis and Liam Fox standing by the cliff edge like the child catcher in Chitty Chitty Bang Bang going, come on, my lovelies, come on, just step over this cliff, everything will be fine. And one thing is for certain, they'll be fine. Peter, thank you. I enjoy your Night of the Living Dead analysis of post-Brexit Britain. I can't join, however, your kind of schadenfreude, because this is my children and your children and everybody's children and ourselves. I'm only 46. I've still got another 20 years in the tank, I reckon, before I hang up the headphones. Unless LBC come to their senses, of course, in the intervening years. And I don't want to. I don't get that. This is the psychological difference where people on the other side think that people on my side of any argument must somehow be like them, must be amoral, must be devoid of conscience, must be able to somehow support the incarceration and separation of children or self-confessed sex offenders boasting about assaulting women. No. If this goes as badly as it looks like it's going to go, I'm going to be devastated. I'm not going to be sitting there gloating. It's going to be awful. Being proved right is actually one of the most bittersweet things that can happen in the context of political commentary. And I should know. It's 10:30. Theresa May's way, which is desperate attempt to cobble together a plan that both the EU will agree to and which minimises the damage that we do to our country every step further away from the single market and the customs union that we take. Option 2, no plan. This is the no deal is better than a bad deal school of thought. They're no longer trying to sell you that lie. So instead, they're just kind of trying to suggest that having no plan at all is preferable to having a plan. Or option 3, stick your fingers in your ears, close your eyes and whistle Dixie or sing about fish and blue passports. That's why the Trump balloon has got so many people so excited today, isn't it? It's a wonderful opportunity not to talk about the disaster that they encouraged you to vote for. Let's talk about a balloon instead. Are there any tears saltier than the tears of a gammon? I thought Donald Trump fans were the ones who said things like, you can't take offence, you can't give offence, you can only take it. And they were the ones that tried to turn snowflake into an insult, people who are sensitive to criticism and mockery. The idea that mocking a politician is wrong. Well, Kim Jong-un would agree with that. Vladimir Putin would agree with that. I'm still staggered to see that British people would rather live in North Korea or Vladimir Putin's Russia than live in absolutely wonderful London. Someone did a mocked-up picture of Sadiq Khan in a nappy as well, floating 60 foot above the House of Commons. And that was really useful for me because I kind of thought, and then I tried to imagine other people in nappies floating 60 foot above London. I suppose most obviously Barack Obama. And I don't understand what would be enraging about that. Mocking politicians is funny, whether you like the politicians or not. It's just funny. It's a classic part of democracy, actually. A really important part of democracy. But Donald Trump fans increasingly seem to be very, very close to publicly admitting that they kind of hate freedoms and democracies. When they go on about freedom of speech, what they really mean is freedom to be racist, freedom to poke fun at a giant balloon of Donald Trump in a nappy. No, not that sort of freedom of speech. I want to be able to tell lies about no-go zones and Sharia patrols. That's freedom of speech. Balloons are really dangerous. Big, funny orange balloons of Donald Trump in a nappy. That makes me really cross. I've asked you before, and I shall ask you again, are there any tears saltier than the tears of a gammon? We'll be sticking into that, I think, from 11 o'clock on the programme. Before that, I want more on Brexit. I think the question works today, but I'm always open to expanding the issue, and I appreciate that if you've got your fingers in your ears and your eyes shut, you're probably not in the mood to ring into the programme, but there is no other way now. This is where we are this weekend. This is where the fracture appears. This is where the division that's been inevitable from the moment Article 50 was triggered happens, and we find out whether the snake oil salesmen, the spivs, the pantomime toffs and the liars win or not, or whether the tragic and, to my mind, cowardly and weak equivocators who are desperately trying to minimise the damage without being able to publicly say that the whole thing is a blinking disaster because they're so frightened of the Daily Mail and the editor of The Sun was in Downing Street last night, or they win. I think they probably will win, but then the challenge becomes, how do you sell it to the people that fell for the snake oil? And that is not a job I'd fancy. Although, again, I'm very proud of the fact that if you've been listening to this programme for the last 18 months, then none of this should have come as a surprise. Even if you were screaming at the radio, there must have been just that little bit in the back of your brain who was registering what we've been explaining and saying about everything from the customs union through to the Irish border. And so now, even though you're still very cross and betrayed and let down, you at least have an understanding of why it had to be like this after all, because it turned out there weren't unicorns over the next hill, just waiting to gallop to the rescue. Tim's in Leatherhead. Tim, what would you like to say?
Morning, James. Another option 4, which is being discussed at some length, is the people's vote.
Yeah, yes.
It's something we've been campaigning for since April. We had the huge march in London a fortnight ago with 200,000 people.
And Kieran, the van driver, on the stage. You're right, but it's not a fourth option in terms of what's going to happen in the next few days, is it?
Well, no, I think actually, looking at what's happened in the next few days, I think it changes the people's vote a little.
Go on.
We've always said, let's wait until there is a deal, which might be October or November, and then put it to the vote. We got into this mess through a referendum that was badly managed, badly worded, badly campaigned for. The only way to get the politicians off the hook is for them to give it back to the public and say, is this really what you want? But I think a bust-up today in Chequers, and possibly even a vote of no confidence in Theresa May next week, she could actually turn around and say, do you know what, guys, enough's enough. Let's have a vote now.
On what, though?
Before we have a deal. The vote would simply be, let's just revisit 2.5 years ago. It is a mess.
This is the problem, though. So they need to say, this is the best we can do. And that might be no deal. That might be no plan. You know, that might well be that this attempt to well, I guess you can represent the European Union as something that it isn't via the media to the people right up until the crunch, can't you? And then it emerges that here's an institution with a big long list of rules. Here's someone who's asked to leave the institution but stay in bits of it. Here's the institution telling them which rules they'll have to obey in return for which bits of quasi-membership they can retain. And it is that simple. It's not a negotiation in the classic sense. It's not combative. It's not us versus them. It's a simple attempt to work your way through how rules will continue to apply to someone who's asked to leave the club. But
that of course, is spun to the general public as the EU bullying us.
Yes, I know it is. And it's also your fault, Tim, that things have gone badly for not believing enough.
Of course it is. Absolutely it is. I gave up my job 2.5 years ago to campaign for this full time.
Gosh.
And I've done far more campaigning than I have earning a living. So I'm really heavily involved in the Remain campaign. There are over 130 local groups from Leatherhead.
You're such a mug. You should have just piled in on the pound on the night of the referendum and made hundreds of millions of quid. What are you doing? Jeopardising your own material wealth to protect the country. What sort of a snowflake are you?
I have got grandchildren who have great-grandparents from 8 different EU countries.
Good grief.
That's what the EU is all about. 75 years ago, my mother, who's now 90, was being bombed by Germans and hiding under a kitchen table in South London.
Good grief.
That's really what the EU has done. We can talk about trade deals and all the rest of it, but the truth is it's seen peace in Europe for 70 years.
Oh, are you telling us that it'll be World War III if we leave? See, that's how it works. It's so. I mean, you can laugh. I admire your saying far, but that's exactly how it worked. David Cameron suggested, not even, I don't think, in a particularly sort of hyperbolical way, he suggested that the European Union had clearly played a part in the unprecedented period of peace that continental Europe has enjoyed since 1946, but also since the inception of the common market. And the same afternoon, Boris Johnson was out there saying David Cameron has just said World War III would happen if we leave. He never said the words World War III, but still, the Gammon Army still won't know that.
Very good at spinning, but the truth is we've been running our local groups. We've been doing something called a Brexitometer, which is a poster. You go out into the high street and you ask people to put stickers on the answers that they agree with.
Yes.
Four simple questions. Is Brexit going well? 95% of the people say no.
Yes.
Regardless of how they voted, 95% say no.
I'm fascinated by the 5%.
Will Brexit be good for jobs? Again, 95% say no.
So look, people aren't going to admit it in public, are they?
But they do.
But not in the way that no one's going to come up and say, no, I really want this absolute carnage to continue, even though...
The final question on this Brexitometer is, do you think we should have a public vote, a people's vote on the deal? And again, 95%, regardless of how they voted, 95% say yes, we should have a vote. And I believe, I mean, you know the sums, don't you?
Yeah.
400,000 leavers are already dead. 500,000 youngsters who will vote remain are now of voting age. And I think if you put on top of that the people who have definitely changed their mind, plus a few more people who will turn out to vote because they didn't last time because they didn't think they needed to.
Well,
you then give people the privacy of a polling booth where they can change their mind without telling their mates down the pub.
Yeah, well, you're probably right. I don't actually put as much store in the numbers as you do, because I put more store in the facts. And I know the numbers you've provided arguably are facts, but it's my very, very naive, even in a world where Donald Trump can get elected president of America, it's my very, very naive belief that as evidence mounts, people will change their position. And if you've now found yourself clinging to the idea that Boris Johnson, Michael Gove, David Davis and Liam Fox are going to conjure something out of the hat at the last minute to deliver what they promised was deliverable, while every other sensible politician in the country is recognising that none of what was promised is deliverable, then for me, I still think I'd rather people change their minds than died, I suppose, Tim, is the shorthand way of saying what I just tried to say. A couple of phone lines free on this, 0345 6060 973. Simple question, what happens next? Simple answer, God knows. If Boris Johnson, David Davis, Liam Fox and Michael Gove prevail, then we are literally closing our eyes and just running, possibly in slightly different directions. There's hardly much prospect of those four all singing from the same hymn sheet moving forward, but if they prevail, government gets brought down. Let's see what else they would have been plotting yesterday in Boris Johnson's office. That will be a kind of Blackadder-style plan. You know, or do you remember the banana splits on the telly? 1 banana, 2 banana, 3 banana, 4. And in the opening credits, they were just sort of running around randomly. They had costumes on. I presume they could see. But the Boris Johnson plan, very simply, close your eyes and sprint in whatever direction you're facing. The Theresa May plan, pretend it's a good idea while desperately trying to mitigate the impact of it being such a bad idea. And the Gammon Army plan, close your eyes, stick your fingers in your ears and shout about fish. Is there a fourth plan? 10:45. I like this from Error Gen Failure. What happens next, James? 1. After England's 7-0 thrashing of Brazil in the World Cup final, Gareth Southgate stands on a plinth in Trafalgar Square holding aloft the World Cup, delivering a speech of unity and ethnic diversity that had just won us the World Cup. Someone did a breakdown of the family heritage of our players. It's pretty special, actually. Even Harry Kane. Irish grandfather, I think. Irish parent, certainly one Irish parent. 10:49 is the time. We're just looking at the Brexit options, and no one has really disputed the analysis. I suppose we should read out a few tweets and texts from the Gammon Army. Here's Elizabeth in Clacton. What happens next is I hope you and all Remainers go and live in a EU country, and we will be better off without you and your ilk in this country. Well done, Elizabeth. Problem is, of course, that we can't, because we've lost freedom of movement, you silly woman. Honestly. And this is the level of intellect that you have to deal with. Well, why don't you go and live there then? Because you voted against us being able to? We could do before, but we can't now, so you voted to stop it from... You don't get to vote to stop something happening. It's a bit like, I vote to shut that door, and the door shuts, and you go, well, if you don't like it, why don't you just walk through that door then? Because you just voted to shut it, Elizabeth, in Clacton. If that's really where you are. Might just be indulging in a UKIP gammon cliche. 0345 6060973 is a number to call. So these are the three. Number one, Theresa May desperately trying to limit the damage we've done to ourselves without admitting that we've done damage to ourselves, because that would upset her sponsors at the Daily Mail and the Sun and the Telegraph. Number two, the Boris Johnson plan, which is non-existent. There is no plan. This is the logical conclusion of the no deal is better than no deal. No deal is better than a bad deal school of thought. It was always a lie. The Brexit means Brexit kind of fatuousness. The Boris Johnson plan, such as it is to close your eyes and run in whatever direction you're facing. And then hopefully when you open them, you've miraculously ended up somewhere better than where you started. And then option three, which is the Gammon Army option, which is to either now just say, shut up, I don't want to hear about it anymore, shut up, or Elizabeth in Clacton, well, why don't you go and rush through that door that we've just voted to brick up? That is, stick your fingers in your ears, close your eyes, pretend it's not all your fault. Or pretend you didn't get conned, right? And that's fine, because we all get conned in our lives. We all get persuaded to support things that we turn out not to like. It's just so hard to admit it on this occasion. And part of me does struggle to understand why, because it's national security and national prosperity that's at stake. And I guess if you feel that national prosperity is a pie you didn't have any finger in, it's easier to sustain the idea that voting to diminish it still further is fine. Problem is, as we're now discovering, Coventry voted hugely to leave, going to be absolutely kebabbed. And Jaguar Land Rover up sticks, Airbus today. They impact upon, again, sort of big leave areas. You've got Sunderland, all of the places that are most vulnerable to post-Brexit economic impact. Almost all of them, oddly, were persuaded to vote to leave. Do you know that Airbus wrote to every employee telling them? Jaguar Land Rover stuck a figure on of $1 billion, best case scenario, losses. And still their own workforce did it. And that's where the anger that one feels towards the spivs and the snake oil salesmen and the pantomime toffs will probably never dissipate. But I don't think that it is helpful for people who understand stuff to get cross with people who believed. Because we're quite a deferential nation, you know? Why do you think that the UKIP lot all wore tweeds and dressed up like comedy gamekeepers? Because they were playing to a sort of class-based deference that I didn't really understand in Britain. So when Hitler used the word Volk always, Volk, folk, this sort of mythical notion. And you heard it a bit in the referendum campaign. Anyone who uses the word folk, ordinary folk, no one uses the word folk in normal conversation. It's literally designed to kind of put the responsibility for toxic xenophobia at the feet of working people, ordinary working people. It's absolute nonsense. Most of the nastiest xenophobes I know are middle class or posh. You think that the people who made hundreds of millions of pounds out of tanking the pound on referendum night are doughty defenders of ordinary workers, horny-handed sons of the soil? I think the owners of the Ritz, who punted all sorts of pro-Brexit propaganda in the Daily Telegraph, are anti-elite. That, for me, is the nugget, actually. The idea that we as a country and a media allowed the notion that the owners of the Ritz were somehow champions of anti-elite rhetoric. Hilarious. It would be if it was happening to someone else. Adrian's in Sevenoaks. Adrian, what would you like to say?
Well, just deviating a little bit.
Deviate away, my friend. Deviate away.
Just what you said. I just wonder, in view of recent events, if England beat Russia in the final of the World Cup, what would it be like?
Well, it's quite a tough one, that, because I don't know whether you've picked up on this. I hope you haven't. I hope your life and your sort of information streams are free from this sort of toxicity. But quite a lot of the so-called alt-right agitators are now fully kind of paid-up Putin apologists, Putin supporters. Yes, so that the next chapter of the infiltration and the corruption of our democracy seems to be in full swing. But I don't know where it ends. Let's just hope we spank them all over the park if we do end up playing them in the final.
Anyway, back to the reason.
Back to Brexit.
Yeah.
The semis, actually.
I was 78 when I voted, and I wanted to leave. And I was going to leave, but I've got 3 grandchildren at university, and I chatted to them, and they were adamant that we should remain in Europe. I mean, they're English, but they're Europeans. They travel Europe. They've got European friends. They know more about Europe than I've ever known. So I changed my mind, and I voted that we remain. And I'm so glad. I was very lucky, because I think the situation absolutely disastrous.
Do you think it could, as someone who would have voted leave without the interventions of your rather splendid-sounding grandchildren, do you think it could have unfolded any differently?
Yes, I do.
Go on.
If we'd had Margaret Thatcher back.
Oh, Adrian, we were getting on so well. Margaret Thatcher invented the single market, and Brexit is all about leaving it.
No, but I'm no lover of Margaret Thatcher. But she did get us refunds in Europe. She is.
Yes, but this is the problem. She got us the best available deal. I mean, post-Maastricht, I think she fell out of love with the European Union, but the eggs were baked by then. You were never going to get the eggs out of a baked cake. The rebates and the deals, the absence, we're not in Schengen, we're not in the Euro, all of the kind of special dispensations that were available, we already had. But no one turned around and said that at the time. No one explained it. You're lucky to have you give those grandchildren an extra cuddle next time you see them, Adrian.
There's another thing, and that's Boris Johnson.
Ugh.
And what I suggest is that everybody downloads "I've Got News for You," and just look at the way Hislop and Merton made him look such an absolute buffoon.
Well, they did, but it was a buffoon. It was a clownish portrayal that proved popular. It's only now that you realise he wasn't wearing that rotating bow tie and those enormous shoes because he thought they were funny. They really are his bow tie and shoes. 10:56 is the time, Adrian, thank you. Seb is in Singapore. Seb, what would you like to say? Seb?
Yeah, I think at the end of the day, this charade is going to have to come to an end. And that's
is it, though? Because you missed option 2. Option 2 is Boris Johnson tells us all to close our eyes and run in whatever direction we happen to be facing. I think that's plausible.
It is plausible, but how long will that last? Would Parliament entertain that? I don't think so. I think someone at some point has to come out and say, this is a bad idea. We put the keenest people onto it and the brightest brains, and they haven't been able to deliver.
Yeah, well, but have we put the keenest people and the brightest brains? Seb, you're talking about David Davis and Liam Fox.
No, but they like to think they are.
And, well, the civil service have been beavering away behind the scenes, but most of them feel as if they've been kind of had their ankles tied together and then asked to race against Usain Bolt. So you think we'll crash out, everyone will quickly realise... No, go on.
Yeah, I mean, I think this process has to come to an end. So whatever crazy plan they come up with today is likely to be vetoed again by Barnier. And at that point, the politicians are going to have to come clean with the population that what was promised was never, ever deliverable.
But I'm not... I mean, listen, I have a slightly odd exposure, whatever the opposite of an echo chamber is on social media. I'm exposed to way more gammon than anybody, frankly, who's not actually a butcher. And your optimism that people will actually admit their error or put the culpability for the con at the feet of the con artists rather than the people who were shouting, it's a con, it's a con, it's a con, I think might be misplaced, although it might be that I get exposed to so much gammon that it's kind of corrupted me slightly.
Yeah, I think gammon will turn, though. So most people, let's face it, went to the polling booth with I guess, a sense of nihilistic rebellion. They were looking for a moment of control.
Yes.
They were suffering various different things in the sort of political and economic situation that made them want to rebel. They went there. They rebelled. It's going to be very, very hard to admit that it was a mistake.
And maybe actually...
find a scapegoat. Yeah,
maybe where my exposure is a little bit unrealistic is I don't think the gammon will turn, but there's no earthly way that 17.4 million people are all gammon. So, the people ringing me daily or tweeting and texting me daily to say that they've made a mistake, that they're not gammon. A definition of gammon will be the inability to admit that, which is, that's pretty much the dictionary definition of bigotry, isn't it? The absolute inability to step away from an opinion even when it's proven to be false.
Yeah, but it'll be easier if the government then blames the media.
Well, it'd be very interesting to see what happens when the Daily Mail has a new editor, which should be coming in around about October. I can't quite imagine the Sun effecting a similar sea change, but of course the owner of the Sun also has the Times, so he really can have his cake and eat it.